get a little bit squirmy because today we're diving into a topic that might make your skin crawl. Pests.
Ooh, yeah.
But not just the kind that make you swat in annoyance. We're going to uncover how these little creatures can actually be a serious threat to public health.
It's easy to think of them as just minor inconveniences, right?
Yeah.
But the truth is, pests actually have a long and sometimes terrifying history of spreading diseases, like seriously impacting whole communities.
Yeah, that's right. The podcast episode we're using as source material for this deep dive is titled Pests and Public Health: How Pests Spread Disease. And it really kind of opened my eyes to the dangers. It covered all the usual suspects,
I mean.
like mosquitoes, rats, cockroaches,
Mhm.
the creepy crawlies that just send shivers down your spine.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But it also talked about how fleas, ticks, even lice
Oh, yeah.
can actually carry some pretty nasty surprises.
Yeah, and the scariest part is it's not just about those exotic diseases you hear about, right?
Yeah.
They can spread everyday threats and even antibiotic-resistant bacteria right here where we live.
Okay, well, before we get too deep into the ick factor, let's back up a bit. How do these tiny creatures actually manage to spread disease so effectively?
Well, there's two main ways: direct contact and contamination.
Okay.
Sometimes it's as simple as a bite.
Uh.
Think about mosquitoes, injecting viruses like Zika directly into your bloodstream,
Hmm.
or fleas, which have actually, transmitted the plague throughout history. Even something as seemingly minor as lice can spread typhus.
Okay, that's enough to make me reach for the bug spray. But you mentioned contamination as well.
Yeah, and this is a big one, especially with cockroaches.
Okay.
They can leave a trail of bacteria everywhere they crawl, contaminating food, surfaces, you name it.
So it's not just about them, crawling on your food. It's about them leaving behind these invisible traces that can make us sick.
Exactly, yeah. And what's particularly concerning is that cockroach bacteria can even contaminate the air.
Really?
Oh, yeah. There was a study in a hospital where they found cockroach allergens in the air vents. And that can, trigger asthma attacks and other respiratory problems.
Wow. That is disturbing. So it's not just what we see, but what we can't see that poses a threat. So let's talk specifics. What are some of the diseases these pests can spread? I know mosquitoes are a big one, right?
Oh, absolutely. Mosquitoes are notorious for transmitting diseases like dengue fever, Zika virus, and malaria. And the really unsettling part is they can breed in even the smallest amount of stagnant water.
Oh, wow.
I mean, a forgotten bucket in your backyard could become a breeding ground for disease-carrying mosquitoes.
So it's not just about avoiding like swamps and tropical rainforests.
Right.
These threats can be lurking right outside our doors.
Exactly. Then there are rodents, often found in areas with poor sanitation. They can spread diseases like hantavirus, salmonella, and leptospirosis. A recent study found that in urban areas with a high density of rats, there was a significant increase in cases of leptospirosis. And that's a bacterial infection that can cause serious kidney and liver damage.
Wow. That's a sobering reminder that like overflowing garbage bins and just neglected areas can actually become breeding grounds for disease.
Yeah.
It seems like even creatures we don't see very often, like rats, can have a big impact on our health.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And let's not forget about cockroaches. They're masters at spreading foodborne illnesses.
Yeah.
Their ability to thrive in so many different environments and resist a lot of pesticides
Right.
makes them a real challenge. They can contaminate food preparation areas and spread bacteria like salmonella and E. coli, which can lead to food poisoning. There was a case actually where a restaurant had to shut down because of a cockroach infestation that led to multiple customers getting sick.
It's easy to think about these pests being a problem for restaurants and businesses. But what about our homes? Are there certain places in our homes that are more vulnerable to pest infestations? And how can we be more vigilant?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something we should definitely explore further. But first, let's talk about some of the populations that are most vulnerable to these health risks posed by pests. Because it's not just about individual cases, right? It's about the potential for these widespread public health emergencies.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. While anyone can be affected by pest-borne diseases, certain groups are particularly vulnerable. Think about hospitals, for instance.
That's interesting. We usually associate hospitals with strict hygiene and sanitation, but I guess even they can't completely escape these tiny invaders.
Yep.
Exactly. Even with rigorous cleaning protocols, hospitals can still face pest infestations, which pose a significant risk to patients with weakened immune systems. A study published in the Journal of Hospital Infection found that pest infestations in hospitals were linked to an increased risk of healthcare-associated infections. Imagine someone recovering from surgery or undergoing chemotherapy. Their bodies are already fighting so much, and then they're exposed to these additional threats from pests.
It's a reminder that this fight against pests, it's not just about keeping our homes clean, it's about protecting the most vulnerable people in our society.
And let's not forget about schools. Children are especially susceptible to germs, right? Because their immune systems are still developing. Plus, they're constantly interacting and sharing things, which makes it easier for pests to spread illnesses.
Yeah, so it's like a perfect storm for the spread of germs and diseases.
Precisely. There's a case reported where a school had to temporarily close due to a widespread lice infestation, you know, disrupting classes and causing anxiety among parents.
Oh, yeah. It makes you realize how quickly these seemingly small creatures can disrupt our lives and impact our communities. It's not just about individual cases, it's about those potential public health emergencies.
You're hitting the nail on the head. Pest-borne diseases can quickly escalate into widespread outbreaks. Take, for example, the Zika virus outbreak in South America a few years ago. It was primarily spread by mosquitoes and had devastating consequences, particularly for pregnant women and their babies.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that in our increasingly interconnected world, a health crisis in one region can easily have global implications.
And the fact that pests can spread antibiotic-resistant bacteria adds another layer of complexity and concern.
Right. We hear a lot about antibiotic resistance, but I admit I don't fully understand it. Can you break down why it's such a big deal, especially in this context?
Sure. Antibiotic resistance happens when bacteria evolve to survive the drugs designed to kill them. This is a natural process, but it's accelerated by the overuse and misuse of antibiotics. When bacteria become resistant to multiple antibiotics, they're called superbugs, and they can be very difficult, if not impossible, to treat.
So how does this connect to pests? Are they somehow making these superbugs even stronger?
Well, it's not that they're making the bacteria stronger,
Yeah.
but they act as vectors, carrying these resistant bacteria from one place to another, including places like hospitals where they can pose a serious threat to patients who are already vulnerable.
That's a terrifying thought. It's like a double whammy. We're struggling with antibiotic resistance, and now we have these tiny creatures spreading these superbugs around. What can we even do about it?
Well, it's not all doom and gloom. While the challenges are real, there are steps we can take to mitigate these risks, and it starts with prevention.
Okay, let's unpack that. What does prevention look like in the context of pests?
It's a multifaceted approach that involves individual responsibility, community action, and professional help. At the individual level, simple actions like keeping our homes clean, sealing cracks and crevices, storing food properly, and managing garbage can make a huge difference in deterring pests.
So it's about creating an environment that's less hospitable to these unwanted guests. But what about those situations where you've done everything right and you still have a pest problem?
That's where professional pest control services come in. They have the expertise to identify the source of the problem, recommend appropriate treatments, and implement long-term prevention strategies. It's about working smarter, not harder, to minimize the risks posed by pests.
It sounds like these pest control professionals are like detectives, investigating the root cause of the problem and devising a plan of attack.
Exactly. They're not just exterminators, they're problem solvers who understand the biology and behavior of pests. But there's another aspect of pest control that we haven't touched upon yet, and it's one that's often overlooked.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. What have we missed?
We've talked a lot about the physical health risks associated with pests, but what about the psychological impact? Living with a pest infestation can take a toll on your mental well-being.
That's a really interesting point. I hadn't considered that angle before. How does it manifest?
Imagine dealing with a persistent cockroach infestation in your home. The constant worry, the feeling of being invaded, the potential health risks it can create, anxiety, stress, and even feelings of helplessness. And for people with certain phobias, even the sight of a spider or an ant can trigger intense fear and anxiety.
It's a reminder that our homes are more than just physical structures. There are sanctuaries, our safe spaces. And when those spaces are invaded by pests, it can disrupt our sense of peace and well-being.
Precisely. And it's not just limited to our homes. Pest infestations can impact businesses, leading to reputational damage, lost revenue, and even legal issues.
So it's a multifaceted problem with far-reaching consequences. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the nitty-gritty details of how pests spread disease to the broader implications for public health and even the psychological and economic impacts. But you mentioned earlier that there was one final piece of the puzzle that we needed to explore. What is it?
The role of climate change in the spread of pests and pest-borne diseases. It's a complex and evolving area of research, but it's one we can't afford to ignore.
Climate change. Now that's a big one. How does it tie into all of this? I'm assuming rising temperatures and changing weather patterns are playing a role.
You're right. As global temperatures rise and weather patterns become more unpredictable, we're seeing changes in the distribution and behavior of pests. Some species are expanding their range, moving into new areas where they haven't been seen before, exposing new populations to diseases they've never encountered.
So it's like these pests are hitching a ride on the climate change express, expanding their territory and potentially bringing new threats with them.
And it's not just about new pests moving into new areas. Existing pest populations are also being affected. Changes in temperature and rainfall can influence breeding cycles, survival rates, and even the virulence of the diseases they carry.
So climate change is essentially amplifying the threat posed by pests, making them more widespread, more resilient, and potentially even more dangerous. This adds a whole new layer of urgency to the issue, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a call to action for individuals, communities, and governments to address both climate change and pest control in a more comprehensive and coordinated way.
So where do we go from here? What are the next steps?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that we'll need to tackle together.
It sounds like a topic worthy of its own deep dive. But for now, let's focus on what we can do as individuals to make a difference.
I agree. Let's empower our listeners with some actionable takeaways. It can feel kind of overwhelming when we think about these huge global challenges like climate change and antibiotic resistance, but we can actually make a difference in our own little worlds. Right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Small changes can have a ripple effect.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some tangible steps our listeners can take to protect themselves and their communities?
Okay, well, first and foremost, let's go back to those individual actions we were talking about earlier. Maintaining a clean home, sealing up those cracks and crevices where they can get in, storing food properly, and making sure we manage our garbage well. Those are all simple but really effective ways to make your home less attractive to pests.
It's like building a fortress against those tiny invaders.
Exactly. And it's not just about our own homes.
Right.
We can extend those principles to our communities. Supporting those initiatives for rodent control, mosquito abatement, public education campaigns.
Right.
Those can make a big difference. Volunteer some time, donate to those organizations, just spread the word among your friends and family.
So it's about being proactive, both in our personal lives and as engaged citizens.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about the power of making informed choices as consumers. When you buy pest control products, try to opt for those environmentally friendly options that minimize the use of harsh chemicals.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that our actions have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for the environment, too.
Right. And while we're talking about responsible choices, let's talk about personal protection when you're spending time outdoors. Use insect repellent, wear the right clothes, and be aware of your surroundings. These simple precautions can really lower your risk of getting bitten and catching a disease.
Like having your own personal defense strategy against those pesky critters.
Exactly. And remember, if you've got a pest problem that just seems out of control, don't hesitate to call in the professionals.
Yeah, those pest control experts are like our frontline defenders in the battle against these tiny but mighty foes.
They've got the knowledge, they've got the tools, they have the experience to tackle those really tough infestations. And a lot of times they can give you insights and suggest prevention strategies that you never even thought of.
Okay, so to sum all this up, it sounds like we have a multi-pronged approach here. Individual responsibility, community action, smart choices, and calling in professional help when we need it. It all works together to make a safer and healthier environment for us and for generations to come.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing thing. We need to stay informed, adapt to changes, and work together to tackle the challenges pests bring in a world that's being reshaped by climate change.
It's a really important reminder that public health is everybody's responsibility, right? And even small actions can help create a bigger solution.
Well said. It's not about being scared. It's about being aware, informed, and proactive.
All right, so for our listeners out there, we want to leave you with this. What little changes can you make in your own life to help protect yourself and your community from the public health risks that come with pests? It might be something as easy as just cleaning up your backyard, or as impactful as fighting for better sanitation in your neighborhood. Every little bit counts. And you never know, maybe this deep dive has sparked your own interest in this world of pests and public health. Thanks for listening.